And we continue our special coverage of Tropical Storm Beta in the Gulf of Mexico. Currently, at least at last check, a 60-mile-per-hour storm all the way over into Morgan City, Louisiana. So again, pretty large piece of real estate here where we're going to be watching pretty closely for those impacts. And storm surge is another impact we could get out of this one, out of Beta. The storm surge warnings are up for places like Port O'Connor and Galveston. Storm surge watches here in pink as well. So it does look like we will be also dealing with a flood threat. The flooding could be, I think, the major takeaway from this, at least as of right now, because this is going to be such a slow mover. The water is really going to pile up, and even in Louisiana, where the rain has already started to fall. Well, Lake Charles, Louisiana, taking the brunt of the eyewall from Hurricane Laura as it came ashore as a Cat 4 hurricane. This video shows the walls of water battering the town. The city doused by anywhere from 5 to 8 inches of rain from that. And in fact, the entire region has been saturated over the summer. That means any rain that Tropical Storm Beta brings could really lead to major flood threats. So that's a big concern, Carl. I want to bring in Carl Parker now, our expert. And, you know, it may not look like the most robust storm right now, but the moisture is there.
Yeah, you know, there certainly is moisture there. And one important thing to remember is that you don't have to have an incredibly strong or well-formed storm to get an awful lot of rain. If you go back to 2001, Allison came on shore in Texas, and then it weakened to a remnant low. So it wasn't even classified as a tropical depression any longer. It was just a low. And that just a low came across Houston, produced 35 inches of rain in some areas because it really wasn't moving at all. So you don't have to have a strong or well-developed storm to get an awful lot of rain. That's the thing that we're going to be looking out for, regardless of whether or not this thing has a hard time developing into much more than it is right now. Looking at the landfalls that we've seen along the Gulf of Mexico, there have been quite a few of them. Of course, we just had Sally and significant impacts there in Florida and Alabama, and then Laura, which caused a huge amount of wind damage in Lake Charles and very serious surge in less populated areas along the southwest Louisiana coast. And then, of course, Hannah earlier in the season, which came down into deep South Texas. So when we're talking about rainfall since the beginning of the month, we've had a lot of it with Laura, of course. That was one of the biggest things that we saw with Laura. A lot of heavy rain across North Texas, but right along the Texas Gulf Coast, from, say, Corpus and on northward into Houston, we actually haven't had that much rain. And actually, the soil moisture is rather low right now. So at least there is that. It'd be different if you had all kinds of moisture in the soil, then you'd know you've got a really high potential for flash flooding. Maybe that lessens it somewhat. Nonetheless, there are still flash flood watches in effect in the Houston metro area and then farther down the coast. Looking at the organization of the system right now, not very well organized at all. You've got just a little bit of thunderstorm activity near that center. The hurricane hunters have been out in the plain. They've found some winds of about 50 miles per hour, maybe a little bit stronger than that. But this could very well be a 50-mile-per-hour tropical storm. And it's just got so much going against it here. There's a terrific amount of dry air that is located off to the west, right in there. And that dry air is definitely bothering the system. And let's hope that that continues to be the case. But again, if it does manage to hold its own, Julie, if there is some cohesive low pressure center that comes into the coast next couple of days, certainly we could be looking at some heavy rain potential. And I think that might be one of the biggest things that we face from this storm.
Yeah, we do have to be on alert there along Texas and the Gulf Coast, certainly. We take a look at the rest of the tropics, though, and what's going on out there. A lot of action still here on the map, right? We have Hurricane Teddy that will be approaching Bermuda. It's currently a Category 3 storm, pretty big hurricane that's going to be churning up the waves all along the east coast of the U.S. An area to watch here, got about a 60% chance of development. Tropical Storm Wilfred here, and then we also, of course, we're dealing with Beta, and that's what we know that we're focused on for the most immediate threat right now. Wilfred is currently pretty far, 1,000 miles or so west of the Cabo Verde Islands. It is moving to the west-northwest at 14, and it's around a 40-mile-per-hour storm right now, but it's way out there at the moment, and it is expected in general to encounter some unfavorable conditions, so we think it may weaken. All right, well, this extraordinarily busy hurricane season, Dr. Marshall Shepard, host of Weather Geeks podcast, looks at how a changing climate could be influencing these stronger and more dangerous storms.
We knew that there was going to be an active hurricane season because of the sea surface temperatures, lack of El Nino, and so forth. But there are some climate change signals in there that we have to look closely at. For example, we're seeing more occurrence of rapid intensification. We saw it with Hurricane Sally. We saw it with Hurricane Laura. Recently, we saw it with Hurricane Michael. We have warmer ocean waters, and these waters are deep and warm too. So even when these storms are approaching landfall and they churn up a lot of cold water, the water's still warm enough to support hurricane development. So rapid intensification is something that we certainly expected. More intense hurricanes on average is something that climate change will likely bring us. And something that we recently saw with Hurricane Sally in the Gulf of Mexico, it slowed down. There's peer-reviewed literature that suggests that in North America, at least, hurricanes are slowing down when they get to the coast, and there may be a link to climate change there. It's a bit complex in terms of the steering patterns and so forth, but that's something that I've seen recently with storms like Sally, Harvey, and Florence.
Our team coverage of Tropical Storm Beta starts tomorrow morning on AMHQ Weekend along the Texas coast. We have Mike Seidel, Reynolds Wolf, and Tevin Wooten out there. They're going to bring you the very latest, and we'll be on the air all day covering the latest changes to the forecast.
Weather.
Wow! Boy, do we have a lot to talk about.
Weather Today from the Weather Channel. New episodes every day, only on Quibi.
We were watching it before our girls' weekend this weekend. Some people came down on Thursday. We came today, and we're planning on leaving on Monday. But we've been watching the Weather Channel. We understand the storm surge is coming, and we are not going to chance it. We're going to evacuate like they've asked. So we're going to get out of here early tomorrow morning.
All right, always a good idea to listen to the local officials. Storm bearing down on the Texas coast. Port O'Connor, home to 26 miles of family beaches, a very big destination for Gulf fishing enthusiasts. And let's take a look at what's going on with the storm right now. And, you know, when you look at this thing, it is not doing all that well right now, so let's hope that that continues to be the case. The hurricane hunters have been out in the storm, and they've been going back and forth across the center and in other areas of the storm. And what they've found so far are winds of about 50 miles per hour, maybe just a little bit higher than that. So it would not be surprising if we see a lowering of the intensity at the next advisory. Full forecast package coming out from the Hurricane Center at 11 p.m. And there you see some of the most recent data from the hurricane hunters. Again, winds getting up to about 50 miles per hour, so topping out right around there in this most recent data from the hurricane hunters. So the storm is not moving very much right now. It's a stationary storm. We think it will start to move going into tomorrow, and it's going to make its way towards the Texas Gulf Coast. But the huge question is, what exactly is it going to be? Is it going to be, as this forecast has, a strong tropical storm? Is it going to be something less than that? I'll tell you that it's got a lot to fight as it moves off to the northwest. One of the biggest things is the presence of this dry air. You see here how there's not a lot of weather near that center of circulation. Some of that is a function of the core being just outside of radar range, but you can see just by looking at the satellite, there's not a whole lot going on there. There is, however, rain coming into the north central part of the Gulf Coast. But, you know, Julie, this is a thing that really, I mean, you know, you look at this visually, and you can see there's this incredible amount of dry air across the southern plains in northern Mexico. And, you know, that's what this thing has to fend off as it is moving west and more into that, you know, more towards that, moving towards the Texas Gulf Coast. So, you know, that is, I think, encouraging, Julie. I think it's possible that this thing is perhaps not going to be that strong. That might bring down the wind and surge threats, but certainly we'd have a continuing rain threat, even if the storm is not as strong of a system.
Yeah, I think you're right. At least not as strong as it could be, right? We know many of you have questions about the tropics, so with so much going on, we want to answer some of your questions right now. So we take a look here at this one. This is from Jesse. He says, if a Greek alphabet storm becomes so intense that it deserves to be retired, what's the replacement for that letter? Carl?
Yeah, so, you know, this is really interesting. You know, apparently it is going to be retired with quotations, but, you know, they have to use it again because there is no replacing the Greek alphabet. So there you go. If it's retired, the storm will be listed with the other retired storms for the year, but the storm name can still be used again. So it's retired in a sense, but then it's not retired in another sense. You know, but there's no way around that, Julie, really, because obviously you can't come up with another name for the Greek letter.
Well, yeah, what else do you do in this case? All right. Still pretty unusual that we're already into the Greek alphabet, to say the least. Now, while hurricane season has been one for the record books so far, it has just been incredible. It's also been really awful in terms of the wildfires in the West. In fact, 4 of the top 5 largest fires in California state history have all come from this year. And the Weather Channel's Justin Michaels is bringing us the stories from hard-hit Northern California.
It's hard to imagine living through a wildfire. Even harder still to imagine losing your house. But can you imagine having the video of it burning? Welcome to the reality of Bob Lipkin.
The way a fire can sweep through somebody from nothing to gone in 7 minutes. It's crazy.
This is the video caught on a small security camera in Bob's front window.
Somebody gave me this little cheap $25, $35 camera that I'd stuck up in a window, and it was hooked to Wi-Fi.
It rolled, capturing every detail. Now, it's important to note, this video is not sped up. This is the North Complex wildfire in Berry Creek, California in real time. The trees in Bob's front yard were 100 feet tall. The flames, even taller.
I mean, literally, I could hardly watch it. I was shaking so much.
A friend of Bob's is a firefighter and sent him these photographs, before and after.
We have a 7-foot bronze grizzly, Mad Max, standing in our front door, and he was still standing. And the 2 stone pillars that held up the carport to the house were still standing. We're going to keep those there.
Now, Bob knows it's going to be a long road before they can ever get back to the property. So he keeps a mantra in his mind he's lived by for all of his 76 years.
I've got a saying that attitude is the difference between an ordeal and an adventure. And the only difference, that. I'm trying to keep a good attitude.
In Oroville, California, Justin Michaels, The Weather Channel.
Such a tough situation there. And a quick check on the fires right now. 84 active fires here in the West, over 5 million acres. Has been a little bit of rain over the last couple of days, but we still have these air quality alerts for places like Medford and Seattle. So air is still not great out in these areas, and the humidity is still very low in the teens. So again, the fire danger continuing in the West, though we do expect a little more rain late this week.
It's about the humans. These humans, those humans.
Welcome into our special extended live coverage tonight as we track Tropical Storm Beta in the Gulf. I'm meteorologist Julie Martin, joined in studio tonight by storm specialist Carl Parker. Beta currently in the Gulf of Mexico. It is a 60-mile-per-hour storm at last check. It's basically stationary right now, not moving anywhere at all. Not very organized either at the moment, but we do expect in general a westward push over the next couple of days toward the Texas coast. For For that reason, hurricane watches are up in orange here from Corpus Christi to Galveston. Those areas on alert, and then tropical storm watches and warnings all the way from the Mexican border, basically over into Louisiana. So everyone along these coastal areas certainly does need to be on guard here, as the storm could draw closer and bring with it not only a lot of rainfall and wind, but also storm surge. So storm surge watches and warnings are also up from Port Mansfield up to Cameron, Louisiana. A storm surge warning for places like Galveston and Port O'Connor. So that could be a concern. The rainfall also a concern, not only in Texas, but into Louisiana, possibly even farther along the Gulf Coast at some point. But right now, these areas are already getting some rain associated with Beta, and plenty more to come, Carl, over the next few days.
Yeah, that's right. I think rain is going to be one of the biggest concerns that we have with this storm. It is really struggling right now and may continue to struggle. Let's hope so. Let's keep our fingers crossed. Right now, officially a 60-mile-per-hour storm. The hurricane hunters are out in the system. They are finding top winds of around 55 miles per hour, so maybe it's a shade less intense than that. But, you know, you look at the satellite presentation, you can see very clearly that it's not all that healthy of a storm. And the big question is, what's it going to do here in the next couple of days? Is it going to manage to get its act together? It's got a lot in the way of headwinds, and I'll show you why here in a moment. So the forecast calling for it to be a strong tropical storm, just a tad below hurricane strength, coming towards the coast, and that would be, you know, approaching tomorrow and then coming in Monday perhaps on this timeline, and then slowly working up and along the coast. Now, one thing that's got us concerned is the slow forward speed. Even if it's not as intense and there is some reduction in the wind and surge threat, there's still likely going to be some very heavy rain in at least some areas. So that certainly will continue to be a threat regardless of what we have in terms of the intensity and the structure of the storm. But, you know, again, right now, just not a very well-formed storm at all. There is some heavier rain coming up towards the northern Gulf Coast. We're going to see more of that in the overnight. But you look at the wind shear here, and, you know, wind shear is the enemy of tropical systems. When you've got strong winds, and we certainly are seeing that, it makes it very, very difficult for thunderstorms to collect about the center. So that's part of what's going on. Another really big part of what's going on is this vast pool of dry air seen in the orange there across the Lone Star State, northern Mexico, much of the western part of the Gulf of Mexico. So the storm is going to be working west and more toward this area of very, very dry air. And dry air tends to weaken tropical systems because thunderstorms just collapse when there's plenty of dry air around. So looking at some of the intensity guidance here from the models, you see that a lot of it indicates that we could see a storm that's around a mid-grade tropical storm. We'll see if this holds. Just keep in mind that these models are run many times a day, and so this is just a snapshot right now. This is not to say that this is it. This is what it's going to be from this point on. But certainly, again, because the storm does have all these things working against it, we can hope that it's not going to get much stronger than it is. There you see the model forecast. Storm coming towards the coast, approaching tomorrow, and then coming in probably on Monday, and then slowly working up and towards the northeast after that. That appears to be the consensus for the most part. So, you know, you look at the rainfall forecast and you see these areas of 3 to 5 inches with even more than that potentially across parts of Louisiana because of the moisture that's going to be coming in tonight and tomorrow. But I think that probably, Julie, is the thing that we have to be concerned about most. Just how much rain are we going to get out of the system? Here, by the way, is the European model showing you the storm really getting close tomorrow. We still see this sort of an odd structure where you've got some dry air wrapping in the underside and into the east side of the circulation, and then it continues to work in slowly during the day on Monday. So, you know, again, let's keep our fingers crossed. Let's hope that that is what ends up happening, that it doesn't end up strengthening that much. But regardless of whether it does or not, we could still be looking at flooding rains along the Texas Gulf Coast and farther east into Louisiana. Julie?
Yeah, very good point there. Well, anglers along the Texas coast starting to get their boats out of the water ahead of Tropical Storm Beta. Storm surge could get pretty dangerous near high tide from Sunday through Tuesday in that area.
We're all pretty aware of what the weather's doing at any given point in time. You know, most people get their property secured and safe. You know, if it's going to be a storm surge, that's legitimate.
Surge is expected to be between 2 to 4 feet as Beta comes ashore. So we look at some of the timing here for a place like New Orleans. Already raining there right now from this tropical moisture associated with Beta, and it's going to continue to just pour on and off over the next couple of days. So from New Orleans into the southern parishes, do expect possible flash flooding to be an issue. Baton Rouge, another city to watch for that. You know that these are extremely low-lying areas, and we're already pretty wet here. So again, more moisture coming in even as of Sunday evening into Monday. Looking at the forecast for you in New Orleans, does look like we'll continue that pattern of the rain and the wind at least through Tuesday, maybe some thunderstorms even on Wednesday of next week. So again, a long duration of that rain pumping in, and that could be a real concern here. Also in Lake Charles, it was hit so hard earlier this year. Lafayette, more rain coming in here as well, and continue to see round after round really pour in over the next few days, at least through midweek. So that will be a concern for you. Also here in Lake Charles, rain and some windy conditions at least through Wednesday, and some of those downpours, if they slow down at all, could trigger that flash flooding as the rain continues to pile up. I want to bring in Carl Parker now, though. He is in the lab, and he is continuing to follow some more of the major threats with Beta. And, you know, Carl, as you mentioned, it doesn't seem all that organized right now, not real impressive, but the moisture could be kind of the takeaway here, and you don't need a strong tropical system to produce a lot of moisture.
No, you absolutely don't. And, you know, I keep bringing up Allison back in 2001, which, you know, was a tropical cyclone, but then it weakened to the point where it wasn't even a tropical depression. It was just a remnant low, and that's when it did most of the damage in Houston. So certainly the fact that it's not moving all that quickly has got us concerned. And we want to show you the rainfall since the beginning of the month. And you'll see here areas of very heavy rain, one related to Laura, and that, of course, over parts of northwest Florida and Alabama, and then into Georgia. And then there are pockets of heavier rain in the north central part of Texas, but right along the Texas Gulf Coast and along the Louisiana Gulf Coast, we actually have not seen that much rain over the last couple of weeks. So that's a good thing. The ground is not full of water. Nonetheless, there is this flash flood threat. There you see the flash flood watches in effect in the Houston metro area, Harris County and on southward down into Brazoria, and then down towards Matagorda Bay and farther southwest. So here's a look at the area of potential for flooding for tomorrow and into Monday morning. See, it's possible there along the upper Texas coast, and then it's probably going to grow from Monday and into Tuesday because this system is just going to be sitting in along the coast. So here's one high-resolution model forecast, and I think doing a pretty good job of showing us what the storm looks like right now. So that's one of the questions that we ask when we look at these models. Is it initializing properly? Does it look like what's actually happening right now? Couple of takeaways from this. One is that you can follow this moisture that's coming up there and into Louisiana. That's going to be happening late tonight and through the morning tomorrow. So there is going to be a lot of rain in southeast Texas, southeast Louisiana, well away from that center of circulation. And then the center of circulation will make its way towards southeast Texas. What is that going to look like? Is it still going to be pestered by dry air? Some of the models indicating that that could very well be the case. But we could still have a more concentrated area of heavy rain there, Julie. And, as that comes in, if it comes right into Houston, as this model is showing, it might be farther southwest. Well, certainly that could be a big deal there in Houston.
Yeah, we want to check in on Houston right now. We think you are one city that definitely needs to be on alert for potentially heavy rainfall from Beta. We know this is an urbanized city. It's very vulnerable to flooding as well. No stranger to flooding in Houston. So this is just a heads up for you as Beta makes its way eventually west. So we take a look at some of the factors that can trigger flooding in Houston. It's a major city, huge metropolitan area. Abundant moisture possible at most times, especially during this time of year from the Gulf of Mexico. The urbanization, all the concrete and fairly flat surfaces, that does not absorb moisture very well at all. And so the drainage issues are pretty slow here. They actually use Big Bayou. Buffalo Bayou is one of those that they use back out of the city. So since September 1st, it has not been exceptionally wet here in Houston. Carl was touching on that earlier, so that's some good news. So it's not like it's been completely inundated since September 1st with rainfall, maybe an inch or 2 inches in most of the areas here. So the soil is in better shape than it could be. So we'll time this out for you with our future radar here. It looks like we'll stay dry throughout much of the day, or the evening tonight, and then into tomorrow morning. Now we look at tomorrow afternoon. It looks like the rain starts to move in, and then perhaps heavier bands of rain coming in once that storm gets closer on into Monday. Well, you know, it's almost hard to believe that the Gulf Coast in Florida and Alabama was hit by Hurricane Sally. That was just 3 days ago. This aerial footage showing how many homes sustained damage. And even if they remained standing after 100-mile-per-hour winds slammed the Gulf Coast shores early Wednesday morning. That standing water still remains thanks to storm surge coupled with feet of rainfall. Now, Alabama still has close to 33,000 customers still without power. Sally may be gone, but the stressful toll the hurricane put on the Gulf Coast is just beginning to add up. The Weather Channel's Dave Malkoff went to high above the damage to show you what families and even first responders are now up against.
We're aboard a helicopter run by U.S. Customs and Border Protection Air and Marine Operations. We are leaving from Mobile, Alabama, going to where this Pensacola Bridge literally cracked in half.
It's sad. It just shows you how high the winds must have been to break these barges loose.
In at least 2 locations, you can see how the barges crashed into the bridge, collapsing huge sections that connect the mainland to Gulf Breeze and Pensacola Beach. A trip that took 9 minutes last week will now take more than an hour for people who live and work here.
The inconvenience, the stress, the hassle with all that's going on in the world, now you have to throw a hurricane on top of it. All those things combined, you know, it can be overwhelming.
It's really shocking to see it up close like this. The Pensacola Bay Bridge, also known as the 3 Mile Bridge, is basically brand new after a $500 million replacement project that just ended 7 months ago.
Other runaway barges in Pensacola Bay slammed right into neighborhoods.
75 or 80-foot barge that's washed ashore and is nearly up into somebody's front porch.
It's going to be a while, right?
It is. We went through Hurricane Katrina, those of us in New Orleans 15 years ago, and we had the massive loss of bridges and infrastructure and so forth. So sadly, the folks of Pensacola are going to be inconvenienced for quite some time.
Fancy yachts are piled up everywhere, even twisted in dry dock as the eye wall ravaged this area. Around Perdido Key, we saw a home where one wall just exploded onto the house next door. Resorts with their roofs sliced off. And just hours after the hurricane, with streets still flooded, we saw roofers already on the job.
We were over here yesterday afternoon as the hurricane was still moving on shore, assessing the situation and see what we could do.
In Orange Beach, the same city where one person died, these 2 homes were still smoldering after a post-hurricane fire burned them both to the ground. In a Facebook post, firefighters showed how they pulled 1,000 feet of hose through 3 feet of floodwater at 4 a.m. to keep the fire from spreading to other homes.
Yeah, all this just causes stress in people's lives. Everybody wants to go back to normalcy.
This is Gulf Shores, Alabama, where Hurricane Sally roared ashore with sustained winds well over 100 miles an hour.
With a hurricane season this active, this destructive, normal life won't be returning to the Gulf Coast for a long time. High above the Florida-Alabama shore, Dave Malkoff, The Weather Channel.
All right, thanks to Dave for that. And taking a look here at the current situation there along the Mobile Bay and toward Pensacola, plenty of rain coming in. This is, of course, not the greatest for the recovery efforts here. And we are expecting more rain to be coming in over the next few days as well. So we'll time this out for you with future radar. It does look like those same areas that were impacted by Sally are going to be getting more rain on and off through the weekend and then in through the first part, at least, of next week. So that's going to push some of those river gauges into flood stage over the next 5 days, maybe some of them even into major flood stage, the Shoal River being one of them here. But certainly that's something to watch, those rivers, and that could trigger the flood issues there, as well as flash flooding. So Mobile, your forecast looks like this. We will see that rain continuing tomorrow in through Monday. May get a bit of a respite come Tuesday, and then more rain expected for the middle to latter part of next week for you. So temperatures are going to come down. That's going to feel kind of nice for those of you who may still be dealing with power outage situations, but the rain is going to make a mess of things. Pensacola, more rain coming your way tomorrow as well. Maybe a break coming your way, though, Monday in through Tuesday. Temperatures are going to be a little bit colder as well. And then here we go again by midweek. All right, well, we know a lot of you have questions about Tropical Storm Beta, Teddy, Wilfred, and, well, the rest of the season. Send them our way on social media using the hashtag #HurricaneQuestions. We're going to be answering those for you live with our experts throughout the weekend. So go ahead and send those in. Again, hashtag #HurricaneQuestions.
ProPlan Live Clear. You're watching America's most trusted TV news network.
We've got a severe weather threat.
Winds have been gusting the full force of this thing.
The Weather Channel. Hurricane season doesn't stop for a pandemic, and neither do we.
From this point forward, conditions will continue to deteriorate.
Don't let COVID-19 take your eye off the tropics. This year's threat is more complex and dangerous than ever before.
Remain vigilant, pay close attention to the Weather Channel.
No one can cover this historic hurricane season better than the Weather Channel. Get the information you need to stay safe every day. Storm safety in a pandemic, all season long, right here on the Weather Channel.
Coastal flooding starting in Texas. This is the parking lot of a restaurant in Port Aransas, just on the other side of the bay from Corpus Christi. Now remember, Beta is still more than 300 miles away from the state's coast, so already seeing some issues. And a lot of the moisture, by the way, right now is actually in Louisiana. So we want to take a closer look here at Beta. 60-mile-per-hour storm at last check. We will get an update on that at 11 o'clock tonight from the National Hurricane Center. But you'll notice here over toward Louisiana is where a lot of the showers and the thunderstorms are at the moment. So not really heading over toward Texas just yet. But that is the expectation over the next couple of days, that this will take more of a westerly track. For that reason, we do have some hurricane watches up for Corpus Christi, Port O'Connor, up through Galveston, and then tropical storm watches and warnings here all the way from Mexico up over into Louisiana. So everyone in this region really just needs to keep an eye on this, be alert. Right now, it is not super organized. Carl's going to talk more about that, but nonetheless, could produce a lot of moisture and kick up the waves here. Storm surge watches and warnings are up as well all along the coastal areas, so could see some water rise along with the storm. And also the flash flood threat cannot be downplayed. Already getting that rain in Louisiana right now, which doesn't need any more rainfall. That could pile up over the next few days. We want to take you to Galveston. This is another place where we could see a lot of rainfall right now, looking nice and quiet there for you in Galveston. But time now is to get ready over the next couple of days as this storm, we think, will edge closer and closer to the area. And Carl, you know, even if it doesn't get better organized, it could still lead to some flood issues.
Yeah, I think that's really the thing that we've got to look out for, because even if it's not that strong of a storm, certainly it could produce very heavy rain over a sizable area, maybe right into the Houston metro area. It's not going to move very much, not going to move very quickly, and that always increases the potential for flash flooding. And I want to show you what the hurricane hunters are looking at right now. They've been out and flying in the storm. They've found winds topping out in the middle 50s, so it might be just a shade less intense than is the official reading right now at 60 miles per hour. Going to be really interesting to see what the Hurricane Center wants to do with the storm coming up in the 11 o'clock advisory. Generally, they don't move really quickly when there's new guidance that comes in, because they don't want to go back and forth every time the guidance changes, and certainly that happens a lot but there are a lot of things that are pointing towards the idea of this thing maybe being a little bit weaker, and let's hope that that's true. You can see how all the cloud is moving off to the northeast. So that's showing you where there is wind shear. It's a lot of wind right now around this thing, and that's not helping it. And then when you see the orange color there, that is dry air. Tropical systems do not like dry air, and there is a ton of that over Texas in the Northwest Gulf. And that's where this thing is headed, into that area where the dry air is. So it's got a lot working against it. And this is the most recent model intensity guidance here showing you a lot of the members not making it any stronger than a mid-grade tropical storm. So I think that is a possibility that it doesn't get that strong. There's already an area of a large area of strong winds, though. And so we're seeing some pretty gusty wind, especially just offshore. One of the buoys there, Green Canyon, gusting to 59 miles per hour. That's probably an oil platform way up there, so you're going to get stronger wind at that level. And then another buoy here, gusting to 36 miles per hour. So there is already some inertia, Julie, and there will be some gusty wind, even if the storm doesn't get a whole lot stronger. That'll be coming towards the coast, and along with that, we could see some water level rises. We're already seeing some of that along much of the Gulf Coast. Over to you.
All right, so from the Gulf Coast, we head now to the East Coast and to the Atlantic, and that's where we'll focus on Teddy. Teddy should avoid a U.S. landfall, but the impacts will be felt along the northern Atlantic coast. So places like Boothbay Harbor in Maine, Atlantic City, New Jersey, you can see large swells, rip currents over the next few days. So Teddy is currently a pretty powerful hurricane, a Category 3 near Bermuda. It is going to be moving off to the northwest at 13. We think the eye of it will just miss Bermuda, maybe off to the east, but because of its intense size and the intensity in general, it's really going to churn up the Atlantic Ocean along the east coast. And with that, we could see some really large swells and the strong rip currents. So Bermuda, you are under a tropical storm warning right now. Also looking at dangerous surf in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. High surf advisories are up for you. So we take a look at the forecast track for Teddy. Kind of a wavy track out here. It does look like it may just miss Bermuda at about 105 mile per hour storm and then continue on off into maybe Nova Scotia by the time we get into Wednesday of this week. So still staying well offshore from the U.S. coast, but in between, we're going to be dealing with a lot of wind and a lot of wave action. We've got a cold front that's pushing, and that's creating some offshore winds that are pretty strong. So we get the offshore winds coming here. We get the hurricane that's coming this way, pushing up all that water. And you're going to see those really intense wave heights out at sea. It's going to be very dangerous out there, especially for mariners. So these two coming together, creating kind of that push and pull, which is really going to lead to some big time wave action. All right, we'll be back with more on all of these systems and what's going on in the tropics. Tropical Storm Beta starting to stir up the surf along the beach in Galveston, Texas. Beachgoers were enjoying the last day of decent weather, though. The area is now under a tropical storm surge and tropical storm warning and a hurricane watch, with the biggest impact starting late tomorrow. Thanks so much for joining us for our special live coverage of Tropical Storm Beta, the latest threat that's packing the steam in the Gulf of Mexico. I'm meteorologist Julie Martin, joined by storm specialist Carl Parker. He's in the lab this evening, and we'll get to him in just a moment. But first, we take a look here at the basics when it comes to Beta, the second named storm in the Greek alphabet, believe it or not. 60 mile per hour storm at last check. It's been stationary basically for much of the day today, not moving at all. And you'll notice a lot of the action really off to the north and northeast in terms of the moisture source right now. So nothing all that organized at the moment, but the expectation is that over the next couple of days, it will take that westerly track and approach the Texas coast. So do have a hurricane watch up in orange from Corpus Christi to Galveston, as we mentioned. Also looking at tropical storm watches and warnings here from Mexico all the way into Louisiana. So a lot of potential outcomes with this one, Carl, but we want to get the latest from you and your expertise. I think mainly the flood issue could be a big one.
Yeah, that's certainly what has me concerned because there is a lot of question about the intensity of the storm. What is it going to be? It's really struggling right now, and there are reasons to believe that it will continue to struggle as it works towards the coast. And so it may not be as strong a storm. However, we're still going to be looking at a rainfall threat, even if that's the case. You always want to keep in mind you don't have to have a strong storm. A low-grade tropical storm, a tropical depression, something even less than that, which is what Allison was in 2001, can still bring you a lot of heavy rain and flooding. So that threat is not going to change even if the storm is not as strong as it comes in. Right now, a 60-mile-per-hour storm. The hurricane hunters have been out in it. So far, they've found winds topping out in the middle 50s, it appears. So it may be just a shade below that in terms of intensity right now. This is the forecast track and the intensities from the Hurricane Center as of the 5 p.m. advisory. The new advisory is coming out at 11 p.m. Eastern, so not very long from now. Probably an hour and 15 minutes, somewhere in there, is when we'll see this new advisory. Will be interesting to see if they've made any changes in terms of intensity because some of the model guidance is indicating that it may not be as strong. The Hurricane Center doesn't want to move real quickly with new model information because, a lot of times it can bounce back and forth. We actually have a term for that in the business. It's called windshield wipering. Sometimes it happens with track where it moves like this and goes like that and back and back. And so they don't want to react too quickly to that. But it is interesting, certainly, that we are seeing this data coming in. For example, intensity guidance here. And you see all of these models. There's one model that's a little more aggressive with intensity, but there are many, many members that are right there around mid-grade tropical storms. So in the vicinity of, 50 miles per hour, and then never get above that and then take it down beyond that. So it's entirely possible that that happens, based on what it's looking like right now, which is not very good. And also the fact that you've got wind shear and an incredible amount of dry air. All of that orange there in Texas and the Western Gulf, that's really dry air. And tropical cyclones don't like that. And that, by the way, is where the system is headed, towards the west. So it has a lot to get through, but it might be able to just hold on to some structure, and then it's going to get to the coast, really slow down, and then slowly move off to the north and east. And that slow forward speed could have a lot to do with the amount of rainfall that we get. So this is our rainfall forecast right now. You see these areas of 3 to 5 inches. These are kind of smoothed out a little bit. They're a little bit broadened. So keep in mind that it could be higher than that. And so certainly where we see that core, if there's a cohesive structure, Julie, that comes on shore, slowly works up and along the coast, could very well produce quite a bit of rainfall. So that's something I'd be very concerned about.
Yeah, already starting to get some of that rain kind of associated with it in Louisiana right now. So we take a look at future radar. New Orleans, some of those southern parishes, we're going to be continuing to see the rain fall and really pile up throughout tonight into the overnight hours. And then a steady stream of it coming in throughout the day on Sunday as well. So plenty of moisture here, Baton Rouge to Louisiana, down into those southern parishes. That could lead to flooding. So we are concerned about that here for you in the Big Easy. So looking at the forecast for you, again, it's going to be rainy and windy over the next couple of days. And then at least some more spotty showers and storms coming your way on Tuesday and Wednesday of this week as well. Very wet pattern ahead. Lake Charles hit so hard earlier this year, you're going to be getting some more of that moisture as well. So starting things off in the early morning hours here on Sunday, we'll continue to see the rain really just pour in again throughout the day on Sunday and into Monday as that storm gets closer and closer to Texas.
Everything weather.
Wow! Boy, do we have a lot to talk about.
Weather Today from the Weather Channel. New episodes every day, only on Quibi.
All right, welcome back to our continuing coverage of Tropical Storm Beta in the Gulf of Mexico. Currently a 60-mile-per-hour storm, basically stationary throughout the day today, has not really moved a whole lot, and a lot of the rain, a lot of the moisture associated with this is off to the north and northeast, so impacting Louisiana right now. But the expectation is that it will generally be taking that westerly track. It's going to try its darndest to make its way there, although it'll be encountering a lot of dry air. We've got a hurricane watch up from Corpus Christi to Galveston, Port O'Connor, and then we have tropical storm watches and warnings here all along the coastal areas, really from the Mexican border up into Morgan City, Louisiana. So right along the coast there. That's where we could really be looking at some of these impacts, and then perhaps even further inland when it comes to rainfall from this system. So right now, storm surge could also be an issue from Point Mansfield to Port O'Connor, Galveston, High Island. You could also see some storm surge issues as water rises right along the immediate coast. So those are all things to really be aware of over the next couple of days. Lake Charles, Louisiana, really taking the brunt of the eye wall from Hurricane Laura. Remember Laura there, as it came ashore as a Cat 4 hurricane. Now this video shows the walls of water battering the town. City doused by anywhere from 5 to 8 inches of rain. And in fact, the entire Gulf Coast region has been saturated over the summer, meaning that any rain that Beta brings, well, that could be bad news. That could mean major flood threats. So Carl, unfortunately, a place like Lake Charles that did take it so hard, it looks like that same area is going to be getting more rain out of this system.
Yes, it does. And yes, there's been a lot of activity in the Gulf of Mexico so far this year. And this is a map showing you the tracks of those storms and then also the intensities of the storms. So you see Laura, that really stands out there as a Category 4, of course, caused terrible wind damage in Lake Charles. Then more recently, we saw Sally coming in there and producing very heavy rain in northwest Florida and Alabama. So when we look at the amount of moisture in the ground with those recent storms, we see that it is elevated across the north central part of the Gulf Coast. So in those areas in particular, adding rain is going to increase the flood threat. Where you look at the upper Texas coast, though, you see that it's actually a little bit drier than average. So maybe that will help mitigate the flood threat somewhat. Nonetheless, there are still flash flood watches in effect in the Houston metro area, Harris County on southwestward into Brazoria, Fort Bend, right down towards Matagorda Bay and getting towards Corpus as well. In all of those areas, there is concern about flash flooding because this thing is going to be a very slow moving system. So there's the current structure. And, you know, there's not a lot of structure, to be honest with you. It's just not looking very healthy right now. And sometimes when storms get really discombobulated like this and the environment is not favorable, sometimes they continue to struggle. And let's keep our fingers crossed and hope that that is the case. I think there's a chance that it's going to continue to struggle because, you know, to the west of the system, there's a crazy amount of dry air right now, and these systems just do not like dry air. So you look at a model forecast, you see, for one thing, a lot of rain coming into Louisiana with that arm of moisture that's coming up well to the east of the core. You look at the core, you see it's not very well organized in this model depiction, as the storm is still likely drawing in some dry air that is wrapping right into the center there. And then it does show just a little more organization as it gets closer to the coast and perhaps towards Houston, though it may not happen exactly like that. So, you know, even if it's not an incredibly well-formed storm, it could still have a cohesive core, and that could produce heavy rain, especially because, Julie, it's just not going to be moving very quickly. So I think that is the thing that we really need to watch out for. And, you know, as I say, we'll keep our fingers crossed on the other aspects.
All right. And, you know, while that's the most immediate threat to the U.S. right now, we have plenty else going on in the tropics. We have Hurricane Teddy that's approaching Bermuda, still a Category 3. That's going to churn up the Atlantic Ocean, and it's going to create some major rip current threats along the East Coast, also some really big waves. Beta, as we've been talking about, we have Wilfred well out at sea here, and another area to watch with about a 60% chance of development. So tropics are still really lit up here. We look at a storm like Wilfred. This one not really looking as impressive. It's still well out at sea, a 40-mile-per-hour storm right now. The general westward motion of this over the next couple of days actually shows it weakening just a little bit. So again, that one is not a threat for us right now. This area of disturbed weather here, this is post-tropical storm Paulette. I forgot about Paulette. This is the one that could reemerge again. So Paulette has about a 50% chance of developing. We expect that it could fall a little bit farther to the south and actually redevelop, which is pretty crazy stuff as well. And that would be the 5-day development area. All right, well, this extraordinarily busy Atlantic hurricane season, Dr. Marshall Shepard, the host of the Weather Geeks podcast, looks at how a changing climate could be influencing these stronger and more dangerous storms.
We knew that there was going to be an active hurricane season because of the sea surface temperatures, lack of El Nino, and so forth. But there are some climate change signals in there that we have to look closely at. For example, we're seeing more occurrence of rapid intensification. We saw it with Hurricane Sally. We saw it with Hurricane Laura. Recently, we saw it with Hurricane Michael. We have warmer ocean waters, and these waters are deep and warm too. So even when these storms are approaching landfall and they churn up a lot of cold water, the water's still warm enough to support hurricane development. So rapid intensification is something that we certainly expected. More intense hurricanes on average is something that climate change will likely bring us. And something that we recently saw with Hurricane Sally in the Gulf of Mexico, it slowed down. There's peer-reviewed literature that suggests that in North America, at least, hurricanes are slowing down when they get to the coast, and there may be a link to climate change there. It's a bit complex in terms of the steering patterns and so forth, but that's something that I've seen recently with storms like Sally, Harvey, and Florence.
Our team coverage of Tropical Storm Beta starts tomorrow morning on AMHQ Weekend along the Texas coast. We have Mike Seidel out, Reynolds Wolf, and Tevin Wooten. They're going to bring you the very latest. We'll also be on the air all day tomorrow covering the latest changes to this forecast.
Most trusted TV news network.
We've got severe weather threat.
Winds have been gusting the full force of this thing.
The Weather Channel.
You got to know when to leave town, and that's what we're going to do.
All right, so folks trying to decide what to do out ahead of this storm, certainly listening to local officials is the #1 thing that we want you to keep in mind. Port O'Connor, by the way, home to 26 miles of family beaches, currently under a voluntary evacuation. And so something to think about as the storm gets closer. We are seeing some encouraging signs right now, though. The hurricane hunters have been out in the storm, and they have found winds topping out around 55 miles per hour. So it might be just a shade weaker, but certainly as you look at it, you look at this thing and you can see it is not a very well-formed storm. You're not seeing a big blow-up of thunderstorms about that center. You can really tell when a storm looks like it's doing well, it's healthy, and this is not the case at all. So we've got a new forecast package coming from the Hurricane Center, probably about an hour or so. Will be interesting to see if they make any changes in terms of intensity here. This was as of the 5 o'clock advisory, and they did back off a little bit in terms of intensity relative to previous forecasts based on current trends and also what they're seeing in the modeling. And so as of 5 p.m., they were no longer calling for the storm officially to become a hurricane. Of course, being just shy of that, it could very well, get to that level if it was up to 70 miles per hour. So, there's not a whole lot of difference in there, but just interesting to note the downward trend. And we may continue to see something like that. They don't want to move too quickly at the Hurricane Center, but we may continue to see that. You look at the intensity guidance here, and a lot of that guidance indicates the storm is going to top out somewhere around mid-grade tropical storm strength. So that would be great as regards the wind threat. It would be great as regards the surge threat. It would lower those threats if the storm is not as strong as just shy of being a hurricane, but it might not change the rainfall forecast very much at all. Now, one thing that we're looking at with this storm, you see the orange right there? That's dry air, and tropical cyclones do not like dry air. There is a terrific amount of that in the Northwest Gulf and in Texas, and that's where this storm is headed. And so, again, there's a lot that's working against the storm at this point, and fingers crossed, let's hope that it continues to and that we don't end up seeing that strong of a storm. But still, Julie, as I mentioned, could be a very serious rain threat.
Yeah, and while hurricane season has definitely been one for the record books, so too has this year's wildfire season in the West. For thousands of families, life right now is really in limbo, not knowing when they can return home. Our Justin Michaels spent some time with those waiting to find out what's next.
Frustrations are growing at the Lakeside Market in Oroville, California.
It's just, we don't know what to do, you know?
This place is now the base of operations for hundreds waiting to get back to Berry Creek, a small mountain town of 1,200 nearly leveled by the North Complex fire last Tuesday.
So yeah, it's frustrating not even be able to go look.
Police are stopping everyone, including residents.
We don't know if we need a motel for a couple days or if it's going to be a couple weeks or a month.
It wouldn't do anyone any good to go into an unsafe situation.
As stressful as it may be, CAL FIRE says keeping people away is an important part of the recovery process for now.
The fire front may have moved on, but it takes a long time for the material to finish burning out.
Making streets like these incredibly dangerous, as flare-ups are still possible. Utilities need to be deemed safe, and hotspots need to be put out. We see it time and time again covering wildfires in California, how the fire almost discriminates against some houses. Here in this residential section of Berry Creek, California, you can see house after house, car after car, property after property, completely laid to waste by the flames. With the exception of the neighbor at the end of the street, it's almost as if their house wasn't even touched. Of the more than 1,100 structures destroyed, more than 700 were homes, including that of Donald Wise.
I just moved my stuff last month.
Now, we all talk about how bad 2020 has been. Well, for Donald, it can't get much worse.
Yeah, so pretty much lost everything.
Including his wife, earlier this year.
She passed away in June from cancer.
A man dealing with 2 impossible situations in 3 months.
It's hard to have any emotion, really. It's just like kind of numb, you know, at what's been happening.
Getting back to Berry Creek has more meaning to Donald than possibly anyone else who called this mountain home. He's looking for just one thing.
I know the ashes of my wife are, you know, I mean, that's just not going to survive. It's just going to be mixing with the rest. So that would be the main thing, is try to get her out there, because we were supposed to take her back to Hawaii, and we're going to spread our ashes back in Hawaii. So
a reality Donald knows will likely never happen. Just one more unthinkable story of tragedy from the California wildfires.
It's just like kind of a numb feeling, like, all right, what's next?
In Oroville, California, Justin Michaels, The Weather Channel.
Yeah, such a sad situation there. We are still dealing with 84 active U.S. wildfires, over 5 million acres burned. We're looking at, again, some dangerous fire weather over the next few days. We have gotten a little bit of rain in Oregon, some of these places, but the air quality is still pretty poor in places like Medford and Seattle. Does look like the fire danger still exists here, but some more rain expected in the next 5 to 7 days. Meanwhile, Beta, a swirling storm in the far western Gulf Coast. Our coverage continues with the latest forecast. Our special extended live coverage tonight as we track Tropical Storm Beta in the Gulf. I'm meteorologist Julie Martin, joined in studio tonight by storm specialist Carl Parker. We're going to get it over to Carl in just a moment. Right now, though, Beta, last check, a 60-mile-per-hour storm here in the Gulf of Mexico. It really hasn't moved much at all throughout the day. It's currently stationary. A lot of the moisture with this also off to the north and northeast, so it's actually pretty far away from the storm itself, and that's impacting places like Louisiana. But the expectation over the next couple of days is that it will, in general, take that westerly track, moving perhaps onshore in Texas. We do have hurricane watches up for Corpus Christi up through Galveston here. Also, tropical storm watches and warnings stretching from the Mexican border all the way over into Louisiana. So a very wide area here. A lot of people in these areas just need to be on alert over the next couple of days. Could be Monday before we start to see some of these impacts. Storm surge warnings are up also for Port O'Connor, for Galveston, and then storm surge watches up in pink. So the water rise could also become an issue along with the flooding rain coming from this tropical system. So we are looking at coastal flood advisories here, places like the lower Louisiana parishes, Grand Isle over to Morgan City, New Iberia. So Carl, I think flooding could be a major issue with this. The storm right now itself, well, it doesn't look all that organized, but that doesn't mean it couldn't become more organized, right?
Yeah, and that really is the big question right now, and given what it's likely to continue to face over the next couple of days. So the official forecast calling for some gradual strengthening up to 70 miles per hour as the storm to that. We've seen some lowering in the intensity model guidance here within the last few hours. And there you see the forecast from the Hurricane Center as of 5 p.m. Again, calling for it to be a 70 mile per hour tropical storm getting towards the coast between Sunday and Monday, and then really slowing down and moving up and along the coast. But there is some chance, I think, that it won't be quite that strong, and I'll show you what is bothering the system. As you look at this right now, you look at the satellite and radar imagery together. We can't see all of the radar way out into the central part of the Gulf, but we can tell between these two things that it's just not very well organized right now. And part of the reason for that is that it's being sheared. There's wind shear. You know, a tropical cyclone has this idealized model where warm and humid air comes in at the base, rises up through thunderstorms that collect about the center of the circulation, and then goes out at the top. And if you've got wind shear interrupting that flow, interrupting that in, up, and out model, well, then it's not going to work as well, and those thunderstorms can be taken away from that low-level center, and then it's just not going to organize at all. So wind shear is present, but then also there is this crazy amount of dry air. All of that orange shading there in Texas and the Northwest Gulf and in Mexico, that's all dry air, and tropical cyclones don't like that at all. That tends to kill off the thunderstorms as they are trying to develop. And that's where it's headed. It's headed towards the west. So when you look at a lot of this model intensity guidance, a lot of it takes it to mid-grade tropical strength and then slowly weakens it after that. So I think it is possible that it doesn't get much stronger. Certainly that would be good news. That would mean a lessening of the wind threat. That would mean a lessening of the surge threat. However, it could still be a really serious rainfall threat, even if it's not a real strong storm. And part of the reason for that is that it's going to slow down. It's going to make its way to the west, most likely come into the coast or maybe just shy of that, and then slowly drift off to the northeast. So that slow forward speed is really, really important. And when you look at the model forecast here for rainfall, this is a blend of a lot of different models. We see a pretty large area of 3 to 5 inches of rain along the upper Texas coast, but it certainly could be heavier than that. There are some indications that we could get up above 5 inches, especially as you get closer to the coast. So Julie, regardless of whether or not this thing does manage to get its act together, I think we're looking at a rain threat, unless it's totally killed, which I wouldn't say is out of the realm of possibility at this point. But if we do see any sort of cohesive structure making its way to the coast there, I think we're going to be looking at a serious rain threat at a minimum.
All right, Carl, thank you. Anglers along the Texas coast starting to get their boats out of the water ahead of Tropical Storm Beta. Storm surge could get dangerous near high tide from Sunday through Tuesday in that area.
We're all pretty aware of what the weather's doing at any given point in time. You know, most people get their property secured and safe. You know, if it's going to be a storm surge, that's legitimate.
Surge is forecast to be between 2 to 4 feet as Beta comes ashore. So we look at some of the timing in terms of the impacts from Beta, and with a place like New Orleans already getting the rain tonight, we'll expect to see that continue here on our future radar, showing that into tomorrow throughout the day, on and off, more rainfall coming in. This is 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, and then continuing on really for the next couple of days here, at least through midweek as we get into portions of Louisiana here, some very low-lying areas. So flooding could be a real concern here. We will see the rain, the windy conditions tomorrow and Monday here in New Orleans and in southern Louisiana. Storms on Tuesday and Wednesday possible here as well. So again, flooding could be a big threat here. Lake Charles hit so hard earlier this year. You're going to be getting some more of this rain coming in the area as well, starting off or maybe early tomorrow and then lasting over the next several days. That rain, we hope it just keeps on moving here as our future radar is showing. Nonetheless, any slowdowns could trigger some flash flooding. And we're also concerned about the rivers and streams and creeks also overflowing as a result of all of this tropical moisture. So here in Lake Charles, looks like we'll see the rain and the wind continuing at least through, say, Tuesday and into Wednesday of this week. So it does look like a pretty stormy pattern here in Corpus Christi. Also looks like tomorrow you may still have a bit of a break, but then we start to get things going in your area come Monday. We want to talk a little bit more, though, about the flood threat with the tropical storm Beta. I think that could be the real calling card of this, at least at this early stage.
Yeah, and a lot of what drives flood threat is how much rain you've had in recent weeks. And when we go back to the beginning of the month, we can see that many parts of the upper Texas coast and then Louisiana coast have seen a fair amount of rainfall for the last couple of weeks, but not nearly as much as, say, they've gotten in Northwest Florida from Sally, of course, and southern Alabama, a lot also in North Texas. So the ground is actually not that full of water there in the upper Texas coast. That could mitigate the threat somewhat. Nonetheless, there are flood watches up in the Houston metro area from Harris County on southward into Brazoria and Fort Bend and right down towards Matagorda Bay as well and Rockport. So there's the flash flood threat from tomorrow into Monday morning. That is going to expand, we believe, from near Matagorda Bay and on northward and up towards Houston. And so, keep in mind, even if the storm is not incredibly well organized, it still could produce a lot of heavy rain. This is one of the high resolution models showing you how this could potentially play out here. It's doing a pretty good job of representing what's happening right now. That's an important part of what we look for when looking at models. And you notice that it's got this just little area of storms near the center of circulation, then wet weather coming up well to the east of that up into Louisiana. That'll continue through the overnight and into tomorrow. So there could be quite a bit of heavy rain in Louisiana. Then you see we've still got some of that drier air wrapping in around the south side into the center of circulation. So it's having a very hard time getting organized. And what this model shows is finally just a little more organization as it nears the coast on Monday. It may not be exactly there. It may not happen exactly at this time. This is meant to give you the idea, the general idea. And so there could be a more concentrated area of heavy rain along with that, maybe more than 3, 4, 5 inches there in the Houston metro. And then, as I mentioned, a good bit of rain also into southeast Louisiana. So, yes, as you say, Julie, I think this could be the calling card of the storm, particularly if it doesn't end up getting a whole lot stronger.
All right, we want to check out Houston now. One city we think we may need to be on alert for potential heavy rain from Beta. We know this is a very urbanized city. It's very vulnerable to flooding. We've had numerous storms that have come through. I can't forget Harvey, of course, which was just devastating to the city of Houston. So we look at the factors that really go into what could make Houston flood, and there are plenty of them. First of all, it's a very major metropolitan area. You have abundant moisture because you're close to the Gulf of Mexico. The urbanization, well, that limits the availability for that soil to absorb the moisture. We're talking about a lot of pavement, a lot of really flat areas as well. So drainage in Houston takes a while. They actually use a bayou system to get the water out, and that takes time. So that's just some of the reasons why Houston you can easily flood. The good news is we haven't had a whole lot of rain since September 1st here, so maybe a couple of inches in general. So the ground is not super saturated. So that could be a really helpful factor if we do in fact see some flooding rains coming in from Beta. So we'll take you through our future radar, staying dry throughout the day tomorrow. I do think maybe by tomorrow afternoon, we'll get maybe a shower or two start to come in. Galveston by noon on Sunday certainly looks like you'll be getting some of that rain, perhaps pushing through Houston in the late afternoon hours tomorrow, but it looks like it's on the move. But this is just the beginning. We're going to get plenty more of this with Beta perhaps coming in over the coming days. So could see as much as 3, 4, 5 inches of rainfall, which should be something that Houston you can handle. But nonetheless, things change. So we're just trying to give you a heads up here. Could see 5 inches in and around Galveston, also a very low-lying area. So we'll have to keep watch on this. We do have flash flood watches up here for you in Houston, out toward Galveston and up into Liberty. Well, it is pretty hard to believe. The Gulf Coast in Florida and Alabama was hit by a hurricane. That was Sally just 3 days ago. Aerial footage here showing how many homes sustained damage, even if they remain standing after 100-mile-per-hour winds slammed the Gulf Shores area early Wednesday. So standing water does remain thanks to storm surge coupled with feet of rainfall. Alabama, you still have close to 31,000 customers without power. And while Sally may be gone, the stressful toll the hurricane put on the Gulf Coast is just beginning to add up. The Weather Channel's Dave Malkoff went high above the damage to show you what families and even first responders are now up against.
We're aboard a helicopter run by U.S. Customs and Border Protection Air and Marine Operations. We are leaving from Mobile, Alabama, going to where this Pensacola Bridge literally cracked in half.
It's sad. It just shows you how high the winds must have been to break these barges loose.
In at least 2 locations, you can see how the barges crashed into the bridge, collapsing huge sections that connect the mainland to Gulf Breeze and Pensacola Beach. A trip that took 9 minutes last week will now take more than an hour for people who live and work here.
The inconvenience, the stress, the hassle with all that's going on in the world. Now you have to throw a hurricane on top of it. All those things combined, you know, it can be overwhelming.
It's really shocking to see it up close like this. The Pensacola Bay Bridge, also known as the 3 Mile Bridge, is basically brand new after a $500 million replacement project that just ended 7 months ago.
Other runaway barges in Pensacola Bay slammed right into neighborhoods.
75 or 80 foot barge that's washed ashore and is nearly up into somebody's front porch.
It's going to be a while, right?
It is. We went through Hurricane Katrina, those of us in New Orleans 15 years ago, and we had the massive loss of bridges and infrastructure and so forth. So sadly, the folks of Pensacola are going to be inconvenienced for quite some time.
Fancy yachts are piled up everywhere, even twisted in dry dock as the eye wall ravaged this area. Around Perdido Key, we saw a home where one wall just exploded onto the house next door. Resorts with their roofs sliced off. And just hours after the hurricane, with streets still flooded, we saw roofers already on the job.
We were over here yesterday afternoon as the hurricane was still moving on shore, assessing the situation and see what we could do.
In Orange Beach, the same city where one person died, these 2 homes were still smoldering after a post-hurricane fire burned them both to the ground. In a Facebook post, firefighters showed how they pulled 1,000 feet of hose through 3 feet of floodwater at 4 a.m. to keep the fire from spreading to other homes.
Yeah, all this just causes stress in people's lives. Everybody wants to go back to normalcy.
This is Gulf Shores, Alabama, where Hurricane Sally roared ashore with sustained winds well over 100 miles an hour.
With a hurricane season this active, this destructive, normal life won't be returning to the Gulf Coast for a long time. High above the Florida-Alabama shore, Dave Malkoff, The Weather Channel.
All right, thanks to Dave for that. And of course, recovery is still ongoing in the Gulf Shores area. We do have rain as well. That's impacting you as you're trying to get your lives back together here. So Mobile, you're getting some of that rain right now, as well as Gulf Shores, Dauphin Island, over to Pensacola. Everyone is going to be getting more of it, unfortunately, as well in the coming days. So looking at Sunday here, more showers coming in. Again, this is tropical moisture. It's very heavy in nature in general. So we could see some of those heavy downpours leading to some flood issues as well for those creeks and streams and rivers, which are all in some cases already in some form of flood stage, could be into major flood stage for one like the Shoal River here in the coming days once we get that moisture associated with beta. So Mobile, for you, it looks like Sunday will be a rainy day. Monday, Tuesday could get a bit of a break before the rain returns midweek and through Thursday. Pensacola, for your recovery forecast, does look like rain tomorrow. Cooler temperatures. We're in the 70s, though, but we will get a break on Monday and Tuesday. So we know a lot of you do have questions about Tropical Storm Beta, Teddy, Wilfred, and the rest of the season. Be sure to send them our way on social media using the hashtag Hurricane Questions. We're going to answer those for you with our experts throughout the weekend.
hurricane season doesn't stop for a pandemic, and neither do we.
From this point forward, conditions will continue to deteriorate.
Don't let COVID-19 take your eye off the tropics. This year's threat is more complex and dangerous than ever before.
Remain vigilant, pay close attention to the Weather Channel.
No one can cover this historic hurricane season better than the Weather Channel. Get the information you need to stay safe every day. Storm safety in a pandemic, all season long, right here on the Weather Channel.
Coastal flooding already starting in and around Galveston. This is the Sea Isles subdivision on the west end of town. You can see here the water coming up over the dock and into the yard there. And remember, Beta is still more than 300 miles away from the state's coast, so way out there still. But it doesn't take much in places like Galveston really to cause flood issues. So we take a look at Beta, where it's at right now. As we mentioned, still well out to sea here in the Gulf of Mexico. It's at last check at the 5 o'clock hour, a 60-mile-per-hour storm. That could change as we get another update around 11 o'clock tonight from the National Hurricane Center. The expectation, though, is that this will, in general, move to the west over the next couple of days and impact Texas. So looking at a hurricane watch here from Corpus Christi up to Galveston right now. Also, tropical storm watches and warnings all along these coastal areas stretching in through Louisiana. So this, again, could be impactful in terms of not only wind and rain, but storm surge as well. Let's take you into Galveston right now and take a look at what's happening there at the moment. You see some decent waves out there this evening, but could get a lot more wave action in the days to come. We want to get it in now to Carl Parker. He's tracking all things Beta for us right now.
Yeah, this is a really big question, Julie. You know, just how strong is the storm going to be? Because that has a direct impact on how much wind we're going to get and therefore how much surge, how much wave action. All of that can be increased or lessened depending on what's going on with the storm. And the hurricane hunters have been flying out in this storm, and it's been interesting to watch over the last couple of hours. They went up to the northeast side there and got into a little bit of thunderstorm activity, found some winds of about 55 miles per hour estimated at the surface, and then more recently have done this sort of crisscross pattern down across the center of circulation. And what's happened here in the last couple of hours is that the thunderstorms have just collapsed near that center. And without there being thunderstorms near that center, you're just not going to have, not only is it not going to intensify, it's actually likely going to weaken some. So in this most recent pass across the center there, you can see where the winds have been just a little above low-grade tropical storm force. So it is going to be interesting to see what the Hurricane Center does with the system. They've got the new advisory coming out here in probably about a half an hour or so, somewhere in that vicinity, and we'll see what they want to do with it. But, I mean, you can look at it and you can see that the thunderstorms have really collapsed near the center there. There's wind shear and there's a lot of dry air over Texas. And so I think those factors are really going to work on this thing. It's going to have a hard time overcoming all of that, which is not to say that it's impossible. Certainly there have been storms that have managed to overcome adverse conditions like that, but this thing has got a lot ahead of it that is not favorable. There is an area of strong winds that has already developed based on what the storm has done in the last couple of days. So we are seeing some stronger winds on an oil platform well out south of the Louisiana coast. Winds now gusting to 55 miles per hour. And then here you see a buoy that is just off the Texas coast, winds gusting to 36 miles per hour there. So we are seeing some modest water level rises already, 1.3 feet at Grand Isle, 1.8 at Calcasieu Pass there, and then over towards the Texas Gulf Coast, 2 feet in Sargent and also Port O'Connor. So, you know, Julie, if the storm doesn't get a whole lot stronger, we may continue to see this type of thing. As I mentioned, the wind and surge impacts will lessen some if that happens, but it still could be a big rain producer.
It really could. And, you know, we've got that to deal with. We also have Hurricane Teddy out in the Atlantic, and this one is bringing some really strong surf, dangerous rip currents and gusty winds to the beaches up and down the East Coast, including right here at Kill Devil Hills. So yeah, Teddy is a powerful hurricane, a pretty large one too, Category 3 near Bermuda right now. It's a 120 mile per hour storm. And given its size and just where it's expected to go, it's really going to make the Atlantic kind of like a wash basin. And the waves are really going to pile up, as well as those strong rip currents along the east coast. Do expect Bermuda, although you are under a tropical storm warning, we do expect it to kind of skirt just to the east of you. High surf advisory here for Puerto Rico, also the U.S. Virgin Islands, so we could see some rough seas there. This is an interesting kind of a track that Teddy will take, kind of a curvy one, and eventually into Nova Scotia. But with that, again, the very strong wind coming with this and the size of it, well, that's going to interact with this cold front that's coming off the coast as well. So we've got some pretty strong offshore winds in the northeast. That's going to be kicking up the waves as well. And then we've got the hurricane out here, which is going to be nearing in this general vicinity. So those two forces kind of coming together and really just making for some very, very rough seas out there. I mean, some very intense wave action and some very strong rip currents along the immediate coastal areas. So that's something to watch, certainly. This is what we expect in terms of those wave heights, and you'll notice those pinks and purples. Some of those could be 30 feet or even higher offshore. So again, going to be a pretty rough day. You're not going to want to go into the beach here. Now, while the Western Gulf bracing for another deluge, California, Oregon, and Washington are going to take any moisture to help those wildfires. We'll talk about that next.
Gene, did you know Geico is now offering an extra 15%?
All right, some wind and waves starting to kick up along the Texas coast. This is Port O'Connor, just north of Corpus Christi. People out there enjoying the beach today, but conditions are going to start to deteriorate as the weekend continues. Thanks so much for joining us for our special coverage for Tropical Storm Beta, the latest threat that's picking up some steam in the Gulf of Mexico. I'm meteorologist Julie Martin, joined by storm specialist Carl Parker this evening. We'll get to Carl in just a moment, but first, a look at Beta. And Beta is still well out to sea in the Gulf of Mexico. As of the last check, a 60-mile-per-hour storm. Stationary throughout the day, hasn't moved really at all, but we do expect it to start to move and move to the west over the next couple of days. A hurricane watch for that reason issued here for Corpus Christi, Texas, up to Galveston, and then we have tropical storm watches and warnings also from the Mexican border up through Cameron and Morgan City, Louisiana. So a pretty wide, vast area where we could see some impacts here from Beta, which doesn't appear to be super organized right now, and Carl's going to get to that in just a minute. But nonetheless, we could see some heavy rainfall, at the least from this particular system. So flash flood watches are up from Galveston, High Island there, back down into Rockport, even the city of Houston under a flash flood watch from this particular system. Storm surge could also be an issue. We could see the water rise there along the coastal areas. And so for that reason, we have the watches and warnings here also outlined. But we want to get the latest on Beta right now from Carl Parker. Carl, you've been watching the storm carefully and not showing a lot of organization at the moment, but things could still change.
Yeah, it really is struggling right now. And so that is the million-dollar question. What's going to happen in terms of intensity? Because we know that the environment is presenting a lot of mousetraps. There is a huge amount of dry air now west of this thing, and it's going to be headed west and more towards that. So is it going to continue to struggle the way that it is right now? If that happens, that would help out as regards the wind and surge impacts. Might not do that much in terms of the heavy rain impacts unless that dry air can really kill off the thunderstorms near the center. So let's take a look at the latest from the hurricane hunters here. They have been collapsing, and as they've gone across the center of circulation more recently, they've been finding winds topping out in the 40s. So, you know, would not be surprised if we did see a reduction in speed with the 11 o'clock advisory coming out here very shortly. And there you see, again, you look at the satellite presentation, all of that thunderstorm activity has just collapsed about the center. So it's just not a well-formed storm right now. The question is, will it be able to reorganize, develop more thunderstorms about that center? That's going to be critical. If it doesn't do that, then we're not going to see it intensify. If anything, it will weaken. But if it can manage to reorganize and develop more thunderstorms, and then we could be looking at a storm that perhaps gets up to high-grade tropical storm strength or even near hurricane strength, and then really slows down as it moves in and along the coast. But again, right now, a lot of indications are that it's just not a very healthy storm. And part of that is wind shear. You can see how the clouds are moving off very rapidly off to the northeast there. There are some strong winds right over top of the circulation. But then also look at the dry air. The dry air being indicated by that orange shading there. I mean, that is all across the state of Texas right now, the western part of the Gulf, also northern Mexico, and that's where the storm is headed. And tropical cyclones do not like dry air because as thunderstorms try to develop about the center, they entrain that dry air and then the storms collapse. And so it never does manage to get its act together if it's really thoroughly plagued by dry air, which is possible. That may be the case. Some of the model intensity guidance indicating that it tops out around mid-grade tropical storm really never gets any higher than that. So, you know, if the storm is coming towards the coast as a mid-grade tropical storm and nothing stronger than that, well, that will make a difference in terms of the wind impacts. That'll make a difference in terms of the surge impacts. Those things will be lessened if it's not as strong of a storm. But one thing that may not change that much is whether or not we still see very heavy rain. That's entirely possible, even if it's a weaker storm, assuming that it's got a cohesive center that comes on shore, assuming that it's better formed, a lot better formed than it is right now. But, you know, that also is an open question. But certainly I would be prepared for the possibility of some very heavy rain from the upper Texas coast and across into parts of Louisiana as well. Julie, over to you.
Yeah, and Carl, we could also even see some heavy rain in Houston, which is a city very prone to flooding. So we'll time this out for you here with our future radar. It does look like we'll stay dry for much of the morning hours tomorrow, but some rain starts to work its way in by the afternoon and then continuing to pick up maybe even in intensity as we get into Monday, even into maybe Tuesday of this week as Beta draws nearer. So we'll continue to follow this for you. Right now, we'll take a quick break and we'll be back. Welcome back to our special coverage. Tropical Storm Beta out in the Gulf of Mexico right now. We are awaiting a new advisory around 11 o'clock from the National Hurricane Center. The hurricane hunters have been out there flying this storm, and some of this could change when we get that in. But right now, at last check anyway, a 60-mile-per-hour storm. It's been stationary throughout the day today, not moving at all. But the expectation is that it will continue to move a little bit more toward the west over the coming days, next 2 days, and eventually maybe make contact with the Texas coast. So hurricane watches are up here from Corpus Christi up to Galveston. Also tropical storm watches and warnings really lining the area from Mexico all the way over into Louisiana. So impacts could be heavy rain, storm surge. We do have the storm surge watches and warnings up as well. Places like Galveston and Port O'Connor, you're under a storm surge warning at the moment. And flooding could also be a real problem. We're talking about a coastal flood advisory even for Louisiana, which, by the way, Louisiana, you're getting a lot of rain already associated with the system, which is far removed from it. But nonetheless, flooding could become a problem. Well, Lake Charles, Louisiana, taking the brunt of the eye wall here from, remember, Hurricane Laura as it came ashore as a Category 4 hurricane. This video shows the walls of water really just battering the town. City was doused by 5 to 8 inches of rain, and in fact, the entire Gulf Coast region has really been saturated this summer, meaning that any rain Tropical Storm Beta brings could mean major flood threats. And I think, Carl, that's one of the takeaways here that, you know, these are, first of all, low-lying areas. They're right along the coast. They've already been saturated, so a lot of the rivers and streams, they're at capacity.
Yeah, certainly that will add to the flood woes in some areas, and particularly in Louisiana. And we can show you a history of the storms that have affected areas along the Gulf Coast so far this year. And there's been a lot of activity, that's for sure. Of course, we had Hannah coming into deep South Texas. We had Laura, a Category 4 there, causing major wind damage in Lake Charles. And then more recently, it was Sally that produced a spectacular amount of rain, maybe 30+ inches of rain there in Northwest Florida. So, you know, when we look at the amount of moisture in the soil, well, clearly you've got a lot there around where Sally made landfall and also a lot where Laura made landfall. One area where we're not seeing as much water in the ground is the upper Texas coast near Houston. So maybe that will help out some. Maybe that will mitigate the flood threat somewhat. Nonetheless, there are flood watches out in the Houston metro area, Harris County and surrounding counties, and then down towards Matagorda Bay and right down into Port Lavaca as well. You look at the presentation right now on the radar and satellite picture, and it's just not doing very well. Hurricane hunters have been back and forth across the storm. They did find some gustier wind and some thunderstorms on the northeast side, winds in the middle 50s, but more recently, as they came right across the center of circulation, winds only topping out in the 40s there. So, it's definitely having a hard time right now, fending off dry air and wind shear. Those things are probably still going to be in place right up until landfall. So the question is, will it be able to get more organized between now and that time? There's a lot of evidence pointing towards maybe not, that it's going to have a harder time doing that. So here's the model going into tomorrow morning. You notice that arc of storms still coming up into Louisiana. So that's an area that is going to get a lot of rain. But then look at the core there, and you can see there's still some dry air wrapping into that core. I think that's always going to be bothering the system because there's so much of it. But it may be that it does finally get a little bit more organized as it comes towards the coast. And maybe that's going to mean a rather limited area of heavier rain, perhaps in Houston and points farther southwest. So our forecast right now calling for a pretty widespread area of 3, 4, 5 inches of rain around Houston, Julie, and that could be the biggest impact from this storm.
Okay, well, that's Beta, but we've got plenty other entities to talk about in the tropics, right? Look at this, still very active here. We have an area to watch here. It's got about a 60% chance of development. We have Tropical Storm Wilfred, which should not be a threat, expected to dissipate over the next couple of days. And Hurricane Teddy, which is really going to churn up the coast along the northeast coast of the United States and create some big time waves. So we look at Wilfred, we just got a new update on this, and nothing much has changed. Still a 40-mile-per-hour storm well out over the Atlantic Ocean right now. It is expected to move off to the west over the next couple of days, but then by Tuesday perhaps just completely dissipate. So this one isn't one to worry about at this point. Paulette, do you remember Paulette? Well, Paulette might be coming back. Right now it's got about a 50% chance of development. The expectation is that this storm may sag a little bit farther south and encounter some more favorable environmental conditions and develop near the Azores. So that could be pretty crazy. But that could happen as well, and then we'll have to keep our eye on Teddy and what that does in terms of the rough surf along the East Coast. Well, it's needless to say, this season's been extraordinarily busy. Dr. Marshall Shepard, host of the Weather Geeks podcast, looks at how a changing climate could be influencing these stronger and more dangerous storms.
We knew that there was going to be an active hurricane season because of the sea surface temperatures, lack of El Nino, and so forth. But there are some climate change signals in there that we have to look closely at. For example, we're seeing more occurrence of rapid intensification. We saw it with Hurricane Sally. We saw it with Hurricane Laura. Recently, we saw it with Hurricane Michael. We have warmer ocean waters, and these waters are deep and warm too. So even when these storms are approaching landfall and they churn up a lot of cold water, the water's still warm enough to support hurricane development. So rapid intensification is something that we certainly expected. More intense hurricanes on average is something that climate change will likely bring us. And something that we recently saw with Hurricane Sally in the Gulf of Mexico, it slowed down. There's peer-reviewed literature that suggests that in North America, at least, hurricanes are slowing down when they get to the coast, and there may be a link to climate change there. It's a bit complex in terms of the steering patterns and so forth, but that's something that I've seen recently with storms like Sally, Harvey, and Florence.
Team coverage of Tropical Storm Beta starts tomorrow morning on AMHQ Weekend along the Texas coast. Mike Seidel, Reynolds Wolf, and Tevin Wooten will bring you the very latest, and we'll be on the air all day.
You're watching America's most trusted TV news network,
We've got severe weather threat.
Winds have been gusting the full force of this thing.
the Weather Channel.
were watching it before our girls' weekend this weekend. Some people came down on Thursday. We came today, and we're planning on leaving on Monday. But we've been watching the Weather Channel. We understand the storm surge is coming, and we are not going to chance it. We're going to evacuate like they've asked. So we're going to get out of here early tomorrow morning.
All right, always a good idea to listen to local officials. Beta bearing down on the area. Port O'Connor, home to 26 miles of Family Beach, is a very big destination for Gulf fishing enthusiasts, and a voluntary evacuation has been issued for some parts of that region. So we are awaiting now. The new advisory from the National Hurricane Center should be out at any moment, and it's going to be interesting to see what they decide to do. There are a lot of thorny issues surrounding the storm, not the least of which is that it's not looking very good right now, that's for sure. So let's take a look at what the hurricane hunters have been doing here over the last few hours, and they've been flying this pattern going back and forth now for quite some time. They did find some winds of about 55 miles per hour in a collection of thunderstorms on the northeast side of the circulation, but more recently they've been going across the center of circulation, and they've been finding winds only in the 40s. And so it is going to be very interesting to see what the Hurricane Center decides to do with that information. We do know that the thunderstorms have just collapsed near that center of circulation, and as long as that's the case, you're not going to see any sort of intensification. You might not even see the system holding its own in that circumstance there, because we've just seen such a thorough collapsing of those storms here in the last couple of hours. So that is the 7 p.m. advisory. Again, the new advisory will be out in just moments. We're expecting it within the next 10 minutes. So it might actually come out as I'm talking here. This is the forecast as of the 5 p.m. advisory. And what they did is they backed off a little bit on intensity relative to previous forecasts. Rather than calling for it to strengthen to a hurricane, they came in just under that at strong tropical storm based on all of what was showing up in the modeling and also the environment in general. And wouldn't be surprising to see a continued slow trend in terms of a lessening of intensity. Right now, it's just not a well-formed storm at all. You've got some rain along the northern Gulf Coast, but that center is just about as disorganized as it gets. It's being sheared, there's wind shear, but another big part of this is dry air. You see all of that orange color right there, that is dry air in Texas and the western Gulf. And when dry air gets involved with thunderstorms, what it does is it causes the storms to collapse. And that's pretty typical. So as long as that dry air is lurking, I think the storm is going to struggle. It's going to have a harder time. And that is part of what's being picked up by the models. This is the model, most recent runs of the model intensity guidance. And you see that many of these members top the storm out at mid-grade tropical storm strength, and then they show some weakening after that. So if that were to be the case, that would help out with the wind impacts, obviously. That would help out with the surge impacts. That would help out with the wave impacts. The one thing that it might not change that much would be the rainfall, because the storm is going to come into the coast and then slowly move up and along the coast, and even a weaker system can produce a terrific amount of rain unless it just collapses completely. Obviously, that would change everything. I wouldn't say that that is impossible, but right now our forecast for rainfall showing 3 inches plus there in southeast Texas, Houston, along the Gulf Coast, also into southern parts of Louisiana. And that may end up being the biggest impact from the storm, that heavy rainfall potential, as we've seen some modeling showing that the storm is likely to bring that heavier rain in a smaller core and towards the Gulf Coast. This is one of our high-resolution models, and you can see how it's still not all that well formed, but it does finally manage to bring a slightly more concentrated area of heavy rain into areas near Houston. Julie?
All right, well, we know many of you have questions about the tropics, so with so much going on, we want to answer some of your questions right now. We take a look here at this one from Mark Whipple. He says, hey, Weather Channel, I have a hurricane question. What happens if they use all the Greek letters?
Well, you know, that's a really good question. I think they're going to have to figure that out. I don't think there is an answer to that, Julie, because, I mean, we've never been able to imagine going that far. It's already so crazy that you would use up 27 letters and you'd have to get into this Greek alphabet. But then if you were to, you know, continue to use them all up, you know, first of all, I can't imagine, honestly, having a season where you have that many named storms. But I suppose that it is possible. And then they'd have to deal with that if they come to that question. But I don't know what the answer is at this point.
Pretty crazy. Okay, let's do one more. We have time for one more question here, and this is from Sage Ferris. What's the deal with the remnants of Paulette? If it redevelops into a tropical depression storm, will it get the name Paulette or Gamma?
Well, I think as long as there is a coherent structure that you could follow the whole way through, I think that is really the question. Is there a center that you can follow all the way through there? As long as that's the case, then they could continue to call it Paulette. And, you just have to kind of follow, whether or not, that area of spin there. And if it is definable, then it likely would retain the name Paulette.
Yeah, I mean, it's so crazy. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. All right, well, Beta is swirling off the far western Gulf Coast. Our coverage continues with the latest forecast and the track coming up. That newly issued advisory coming in at the top of the hour. Stay tuned here at the Weather Channel. We're going to bring you any changes to Beta next.
I'm Jimmy Dean, and sausage is a great deal like life. You get out of it about what you put into it. You put in quality, and you're going to get out.
Welcome into our special extended live coverage tonight as we track Tropical Storm Beta in the Gulf. I'm meteorologist Julie Martin, joined in studio tonight by storm specialist Carl Parker. We're going to get it over to Carl in the lab in just a moment. First of all, though, the very latest on Beta, still a 60-mile-an-hour storm here in the Gulf of Mexico, is expected to basically move off to the west over the next couple of days, impacting the Texas coast. And we do have a hurricane watch up from Corpus Christi into Galveston. Also, tropical storm watches and warnings extending from Mexico all the way over into Louisiana, into some of those southern parishes there. We just got in the very new advisory from the National Hurricane Center. I want to get into the lab right now with Carl and talk about some of the changes we are seeing now, Carl.
Yeah, Julie, so the storm is still now a 60-mile-per-hour tropical storm. The hurricane hunters have been out flying in it for the last several hours, and they did find some pretty strong winds in a little cluster of thunderstorms on the north side there. More recently, though, going across the center, the winds have been less than that. So it does appear to be undergoing a weakening trend right now. The question is, what is going to happen going forward? Now, there is a change in the forecast here. Some pretty important changes in that they've lowered the intensity as it's coming towards the coast, and that's been a steady trend. So, even as of this morning, they were calling for a hurricane, the storm to strengthen to a hurricane as it was approaching the Texas Gulf Coast. Then they dropped back to strong tropical storm at 70 miles per hour at the 5 p.m. advisory. Now with this new advisory, they've dropped back to 60 miles per hour. And so I think that's a really good forecast based on all of the evidence, all of the model guidance that's coming in, and just looking at the environment and the structure of the storm as it stands right now. And so certainly that will help out as regards the wind impacts. That will help out as regards the surge impact. But still, this is a dangerous storm. I think we're still going to be looking at some heavy rain because the storm is going to take a long time. You see it coming into the Texas Gulf Coast and then just starting to stall out and very slowly move out to the northeast. That takes Tuesday and into Wednesday for it to do that. So that slow forward speed is going to add to those rainfall totals. So let's take a look at the current structure of the system. And, it's just not well organized at all right now. It's undergoing some wind shear. You can see that pretty easily when you look at the clouds moving off to the north and to the east there. Wind shear, certainly the enemy of tropical cyclones. But then on top of that, there is all this dry air. We've been talking about this for a while now, indicated by that orange coloring across Texas, the western Gulf, the northern part of Mexico. With all that dry air out there, the storm is going to have a hard time getting more organized than it is right now, which is not to say that it won't be able to fend that off from time to time, and we'll probably see some blow-ups of thunderstorms, and it will try, but as it tries to become more organized, it will continue to take in waves of these pockets of dry air, and that is going to interfere with the organization of the storm. So here you see the intensity model guidance topping out at mid-grade tropical storm, and the new Hurricane Center forecast reflecting that. Track model guidance showing the storm moving to the northwest and then starting to move out to the northeast very slowly. So, again, I think we're going to be looking at heavy rainfall. I think that will be one of the biggest impacts that we get from this storm. We're talking about a pretty sizable area of 3 to 4 to 5 inches along the upper Texas coast, and then also in parts of Louisiana. But that's not the only impact. We'll also be looking at potentially some surge as well. And the forecast now calling for 2 to 4 feet of storm surge along much of the Texas coast. And of course, that is going to be dependent on the structure of the system, how well organized it is, and what the intensity is. But that part of the forecast holding steady, looking at some water level rises here, anywhere from the Sabine River and on south and westward, actually past that towards Calcasieu Pass, and then all the way down towards Corpus and just north of Port Mansfield, 2 to 4 feet of water level rise, and then 1 to 3 along much of the Louisiana coast, and then down towards South Padre Island as well. So Julie, the news is getting slightly better as we go along here. It looks like it's not going to be as organized a storm as we had initially feared, but of course, we're not quite out of the woods yet.
No, not just yet. Anglers along the Texas coast are starting to get their boats out of the water ahead of Tropical Storm Beta. Storm surge could get extremely dangerous near high tide from Sunday through Tuesday in that area.
We're all pretty aware of what the weather's doing at any given point in time. Most people get their property secured and safe. If it's going to be a storm surge, that's legitimate.
Surge there forecasted between 2 to 4 feet as Beta comes ashore. All right, we take a look at some city timing here for you. New Orleans already getting some rain, and we're talking about this tropical moisture being pretty far off really from the center of Beta at all, or for sure. But we're looking at more rain to come, and it could really pile up, I think, in some of those southern Louisiana parishes and in the city of New Orleans as well. So those pumps are going to be working there. This is a look at Sunday. No shortage of the rainfall, just continuing to get that steady feed of tropical moisture coming on in. And that's going to be the case for the next few days, I'm afraid. So for you in New Orleans, looks like the wind and the rain tomorrow and through Monday, and then some more storms coming your way, and maybe some wind conditions as well Tuesday in through Wednesday. So it's going to be a wet pattern for you here in New Orleans. We are concerned about flooding. Also, Lake Charles area hit very hard earlier this season, and we've got more wet weather coming your way. Already very saturated area here. So from Lafayette to Lake Charles, throughout the day tomorrow, expect to see that rain continue to fall, and then even into Monday, Tuesday, we're still looking at more rainfall coming your way. In fact, we'll take that through midweek. So a lot of that rain is really going to pile up, and if any of those bands really kind of slow down, it could really lead to some flash flood situations, not to mention the rivers, the creeks, the streams, they're all at capacity in a lot of cases as well. Here in Corpus Christi, looks like tomorrow is going to be okay, and then Monday we start to get things going with Beta here. So Monday maybe into Tuesday morning, I would say, for you here in Corpus Christi. Let's get it back now over to Carl in the lab, though, and we want to talk about some of the flood threats. You've got flood, you've got the storm surge, you've got maybe not as much of a wind threat now, it looks like, but that could possibly change?
Yeah, I suppose it could go the other way. I think a lot of the trending has been towards weaker, so that certainly is good news. You never want to say never when it comes to tropical systems, but there certainly is a lot standing in the way of the storm getting much stronger, that's for sure, because you've got just so much dry air and wind shear. Let's talk a little bit about the flood threat, and part of what goes into a flood threat is just what's going on with the soil, how much rain there has been in a given area. We've had a lot of rain in southwest Louisiana with Laura, of course. We've had a lot of rain in southern parts of Mississippi and Alabama and Florida with Sally more recently. We have not had as much rain along the upper Texas coast near Houston, so that may help out some. That may mitigate the flood threat somewhat. Nonetheless, if you get too much coming down too quickly, then you certainly can get flash flooding, and there are flash flood watches in effect in the Houston metro, down to Galveston and on southwestward, right down towards Matagorda Bay and points farther south. So here's a look at the forecast here for potential flash flooding. We think it's possible along the coast tomorrow, and then that threat is going to increase going into Monday, from Monday into Tuesday morning from Houston on southward, again down towards Matagorda Bay, And here's a model forecast showing you how this might play out. This model doing, I think, a pretty good job of depicting what's happening right now, showing you that area of rain that's coming into Louisiana. We're going to see a lot more of that, showing that the center is not very well organized and may continue to take on some dry air. And then, may finally at some point fend that off somewhat, and we may see some growth of thunderstorms right around that core as it's coming into Galveston and Houston and points farther south and west. So, it might be a more limited, in terms of geographical scope, a more limited area of heavy rain, and where it does come in is where we end up seeing the worst of it. European model similar in a lot of ways, showing that more concentrated area of heavy rain coming towards the coast late tomorrow and then continuing to move in going into Monday. So probably a good 3 to 5 inches of rain there in the Houston area. Julie, over to you.
Well, speaking of Houston, we want to check out Houston right now. It's one city we think needs to be on alert for potentially heavy rainfall from Beta. We know this is a very urbanized city, very vulnerable to flooding. I mean, we can't forget Harvey. Just devastating there to the city of Houston. Nice and quiet there tonight for you. But just a heads up, because we could get a few inches of rain coming your way out of Beta. And, this is just a look at why Houston floods, and it doesn't take a whole lot sometimes to flood here in Houston. You've got this big urbanized area, a lot of moisture right next here to the Gulf of Mexico here, a lot of pavement there as well. So the soil, there's not as much soil to absorb the moisture as there would be in more of a rural area. And then the wetlands and the paved landscapes, they drain very slowly. In fact, they use a bayou system there to get a lot of the water pumped back out. So it takes a while. So for that reason, Houston prone to flooding. This is the observed rainfall since September 1st. And the good news is you haven't had a lot of it. So maybe an inch or so in general around the region. So the ground is not as saturated as it could be. So that's helpful when it comes to getting tropical moisture moving in. So we'll time this out for you. It looks pretty good tomorrow morning, but by tomorrow afternoon, I do think things will pick up. We'll start to get in some of that tropical moisture in and around Houston and Galveston and continue on throughout much of the day tomorrow and in, of course, through Monday and maybe Tuesday. So how much rain still to come? Maybe 3, maybe 4 or 5 inches here coming into the greater Houston area. Could see some more along the coastal areas like Galveston. All right, well, it's almost hard to believe that the Gulf Coast in Florida and Alabama was hit by Hurricane Sally just 3 days ago. Aerial footage here showing how many homes sustained damage, even if they remained standing after those 100-mile-an-hour winds slammed Gulf shores Wednesday morning. Standing water remains thanks to storm surge coupled with feet of rainfall. Alabama still has close to 31,000 customers without power. Well, Sally may be gone, but the stressful toll the hurricane put on the Gulf Coast is just beginning to add up. The Weather Channel's Dave Melkoff went high above the damage to show you what families and even first responders are now up against.
We're aboard a helicopter run by U.S. Customs and Border Protection Air and Marine Operations. We are leaving from Mobile, Alabama, going to where this Pensacola Bridge literally cracked in half.
It's sad. It just shows you how high the winds must have been to break these barges loose.
In at least 2 locations, you can see how the barges crashed into the bridge, collapsing huge sections that connect the mainland to Gulf Breeze and Pensacola Beach. A trip that took 9 minutes last week will now take more than an hour for people who live and work here.
The inconvenience, the stress, the hassle with all that's going on in the world. Now you have to throw a hurricane on top of it. All those things combined, it can be overwhelming.
It's really shocking to see it up close like this. The Pensacola Bay Bridge, also known as the 3 Mile Bridge, is basically brand new after a $500 million replacement project that just ended 7 months ago.
Other runaway barges in Pensacola Bay slammed right into neighborhoods.
75 or 80-foot barge that's washed ashore and is nearly up into somebody's front porch.
It's going to be a while, right?
It is. We went through Hurricane Katrina, those of us in New Orleans 15 years ago, and we had the massive loss of bridges and infrastructure and so forth. So sadly, the folks of Pensacola are going to be inconvenienced for quite some time.
Fancy yachts are piled up everywhere, even twisted in dry dock as the eye wall ravaged this area. Around Perdido Key, we saw a home where one wall just exploded onto the house next door. Resorts with their roofs sliced off. And just hours after the hurricane, with streets still flooded, we saw roofers already on the job.
We were over here yesterday afternoon as the hurricane was still moving on shore, assessing the situation and see what we could do.
In Orange Beach, the same city where one person died, these two homes were still smoldering after a post-hurricane fire burned them both to the ground. In a Facebook post, firefighters showed how they pulled 1,000 feet of hose through 3 feet of floodwater at 4 a.m. to keep the fire from spreading to other homes.
Yeah, all this just causes stress in people's lives. Everybody wants to go back to normalcy.
This is Gulf Shores, Alabama, where Hurricane Sally roared ashore with sustained winds well over 100 miles an hour.
With a hurricane season this active, this destructive, normal life won't be returning to the Gulf Coast for a long time. High above the Florida-Alabama shore, Dave Malkoff, The Weather Channel.
Our thanks to Dave for that reporting. Of course, recovery efforts ongoing in and around Gulf Shores, and right now getting some rain in the area, some of that tropical moisture, Mobile Bay as well over toward Pensacola. So certainly not helpful when it comes to those recovery efforts, and we're going to get more of that to come over the next few days. So Sunday, tomorrow, looks like certainly more rain pumping in from the Gulf. And that could really stress those creeks and streams and rivers as well, which are already in flood stage, well, many of them anyway. The Shoal River, you could be into major flood stage over the next few days. Many of these really basins are already pretty high as a result of all of the
Winds have been gusting the full force of this thing.
The Weather Channel. Hurricane season doesn't stop for a pandemic, and neither do we.
From this point forward, conditions will continue to deteriorate.
Don't let COVID-19 take your eye off the tropics. This year's threat is more complex and dangerous than ever before.
Remain vigilant, pay close attention to the Weather Channel.
No one can cover this historic hurricane season better than the Weather Channel. Get the information you need to stay safe every day. Storm safety in a pandemic, all season long, right here on the Weather Channel.
high tide and rising surge pushing the seawater in Galveston up and over the docks. And remember, Beta, our tropical storm, is still more than 300 miles away from the state's coast. So yeah, pretty impressive there. More rain to come with Beta. Of course, right now in the Gulf of Mexico, well out at sea, still a 60-mile-per-hour storm. It is stationary. It has not been moving at all today, really, but the expectation is it will begin to move to the northeast and or moving to the west rather over the coming days, and this will impact Texas at least initially. So with this, we have tropical storm watches up here for Corpus Christi down to Brownsville. Tropical storm warnings from Port O'Connor up through Galveston and into Louisiana as far to the east as Morgan City. So it does look like a pretty wide area where we could also be dealing with at least maybe a 2 to 4 foot water rise when it comes to storm surge, maybe even more at high tide. So that is also another threat to be worried about here. And then the flash flooding, I think, could be maybe the major takeaway from this as well. Galveston all the way down to Rockport and even Houston. you could take on quite a bit of rain from this, and that could trigger some flash flooding. Let's check out Galveston right now, though. Quiet there tonight. You'll notice some decent waves, though, really there off the Galveston coast. So already starting to turn up the water a little bit there. Certainly the rain, the wind, the waves, the storm surge, they all go hand in hand when it comes to tropical systems. And Carl, we could see some of all of it.
Yeah, that's right, Julie. And we do have a new forecast from the National Hurricane Center. The new advisory came out at 11 p.m. And so a little bit of a downgrade here in terms of what they're expecting to near the coast. That's been the trend through the day today. If you just looked at this morning's forecast, you would have seen that they were calling for a hurricane to come into the coast sometime between Sunday and Monday. And there's been a steady trend downward because of what's happening with the storm right now and what is expected to continue to happen. The environment in a lot of ways is not favorable. So right now what they've got is a forecast calling for a 60-mile-per-hour tropical storm to be approaching the coast. And they have said that that is on the high end of the available model guidance right now. There are a lot of models that are saying it might not even be that strong. So, that's important to pay attention to if, for example, we're looking at a 40-mile-per-hour tropical storm coming towards the coast. Well, that's going to really bring down not just the wind impact, but also the surge impact and the wave impact. May not have a big effect on the rain impact. That's the one thing that can continue to be very serious regardless of how strong the storm is. The only way in which that changes is that the rainfall rates increase if you've got a stronger storm. So your rainfall rates are going to be higher in a hurricane than they will be in a low-grade tropical storm. But apart from that, if you've got a really slow-moving system, which this will be, you can absolutely get a lot of very heavy rain. Looking at the satellite picture right now, you can see just by looking at it, it is not a well-formed storm at all here. And a big part of that is due to the presence of all this dry air indicated by that orange shading right there. And that's going to continue to be in place as this thing is driving to the west. It's going right into that dry air. That having been said, it's already gotten going to some extent. There is an area of tropical storm force winds at elevation at an oil platform, winds gusting to 52 miles per hour. That's at that Green Canyon platform there. South Marsh platform, 46 miles per hour. And then there's a buoy that is just offshore in Texas where it's gusting to 34 miles per hour. So already that large area of stronger winds has piled up the water to some extent. We're seeing water level rises of about 2 feet in some areas. Same story along the Texas Gulf Coast. And so 2 to 4 feet is what is expected here, Julie. But again, that is going to be a impact on this forecast.
Yeah, well, and we also have that to watch. Then we have Teddy out in the Atlantic. This one's bringing some strong surf, dangerous rip currents, and gusty winds to the beaches up and down the East Coast, including here in Corolla, North Carolina. Yeah, really turning up the seas, and that's only going to intensify a little bit over the next couple of days as it gets closer. Now, no direct impacts here with the east coast of the U.S. Bermuda could face some impacts. It's just off to your south. Right now, 115-mile-per-hour storm, a Category 3. It's a large hurricane out there in the Atlantic, moving to the northwest at 13. So Bermuda under a tropical storm warning. We think the eye at this point is going to go just a little bit to the east here of Bermuda, but the dangerous surf, well, that applies to you in Puerto Rico, also the U.S. Virgin Islands. We could see some very dangerous waves out there. So here's the kind of crazy track, if you will, of Teddy, and it does look like it's going to curve around a bit eventually into Nova Scotia. But with that, really just mixing up the Atlantic here and creating for some pretty big rip currents and really tall waves out over the Atlantic and even closer to shore. We have a cold front that's pushing eastward here, and then we also have the offshore winds that are really going to kick up the waves. So all of those ingredients really coming together, making for the kind of time where you want to stay out of the water here. Tropical storm Beta starting to stir up the surf along the beach in Galveston, Texas. Beachgoers there enjoying the last decent day of weather. The area now under a tropical